The Moon and Sixpence, Somerset Maugham, Chapter 6. But when at last I met Charles Strickland, it was under circumstances which allowed me to do no more than just make his acquaintance. One morning, Mrs. Strickland sent me round a note to say that she was giving a dinner party that evening, and one of her guests had failed her. She asked me to stop the gap. She wrote, "It's only decent to warn you that you will be bored to extinction. It was a thoroughly dull party from the beginning, but if you will come, I shall be uncommonly grateful, and you and I can have a little chat by ourselves." It was only neighbourly to accept. When Mrs. Strickland introduced me to her husband, he gave me a rather indifferent hand to shake. Turning to him gaily, she attempted a small jest. I asked him to show him that I really had a husband. I think he was beginning to doubt it. Strickland gave the polite little laugh with which people acknowledge a facetiousness in which they see nothing funny, but did not speak. New arrivals claimed my host's attention, and I was left to myself. When at last we were all assembled, waiting for dinner to be announced, I reflected, while I chatted with the woman I had been asked to take in, that civilized man practices a strange ingenuity in wasting on tedious exercises the brief span of his life. It was the kind of party which makes you wonder why the hostess has troubled to bid her guests and why the guests have troubled to come. There were 10 people. They met with indifference and would part with relief. It was, of course, a purely social function. The Stricklands owed dinners to a number of persons whom they took no interest in, and so had asked them. These persons had accepted. Why? To avoid the tedium of dining tete-a-tete, to give their servants a rest, because there was no reason to refuse, because they were owed a dinner. The dining room was inconveniently crowded. There was a K.C. and his wife, a government official and his wife, Mrs. Strickland's sister and her husband, Colonel MacAndrew, and the wife of a Member of Parliament. It was because the Member of Parliament found that he could not leave the house that I had been invited. The respectability of the party was portentous. The women were too nice to be well dressed, and too sure of their position to be amusing. The men were solid. There was about all of them an air of well-satisfied prosperity. Everyone talked a little louder than natural in an instinctive desire to make the party go, and there was a great deal of noise in the room. But there was no general conversation. Each one talked to his neighbour on the right during the soup, fish, and entree, to his neighbour on the left during the roast, sweet and savoury. They talked of the political situation and of golf, of their children and the latest play, of the pictures at the Royal Academy, of the weather and their plans for the holidays. There was never a pause, and the noise grew louder. Mrs. Strickland might congratulate herself that her party was a success. Her husband played his part with decorum. Perhaps he did not talk very much, and I fancied there was towards the end a look of fatigue in the faces of the women on either side of him. They were finding him heavy. Once or twice Mrs. Strickland's eyes rested on him somewhat anxiously. At last she rose and shepherded the ladies out of one room. Strickland shut the door behind her, and moving to the other end of the table, took his place between the K.C. and the government official. He passed round the port again and handed us cigars. The K.C. remarked on the excellence of the wine, and Strickland told us where he got it. We began to chat about vintages and tobacco. The K.C. told us of a case he was engaged in, and the Colonel talked about polo. I had nothing to say, and so sat silent, trying politely to show interest in the conversation, and because I thought no one was in the least concerned with me, examined Strickland at my ease. He was bigger than I expected. I do not know why I had imagined him slender and of insignificant appearance. In point of fact, he was broad and heavy with large hands and feet, and he wore his evening clothes clumsily. He gave you somewhat the idea of a coachman dressed up for the occasion. He was a man of 40, not good-looking and yet not ugly, for his features were rather good. But they were all a little larger than life-size, and the effect was ungainly. He was clean-shaven, and his large face looked uncomfortably naked. His hair was reddish, cut very short, and his eyes were small, blue or grey. He looked commonplace. I no longer wondered that Mrs. Strickland felt a certain embarrassment about him. He was scarcely a credit to a woman who wanted to make herself a position in the world of art and letters. It was obvious that he had no social gifts, but these a man can do without. He had no eccentricity even to take him out of the common run. He was just a good, dull, honest, plain man. One would admire his excellent qualities but avoid his company. He was null. He was probably a worthy member of society, a good husband and father, an honest broker, but there was no reason to waste one's time over him. Chapter 7. The season was drawing to its dusty end, and everyone I knew was arranging to go away. Mrs. Strickland was taking her family to the coast of Norfolk so that the children might have the sea and her husband golf. We said goodbye to one another and arranged to meet in the autumn. But on my last day in town, coming out of the stores, I met her with her son and daughter. Like myself, she'd been making her final purchases before leaving London, and we were both hot and tired. I proposed that we should all go and eat ices in the park. I think Mrs. Strickland was glad to show me her children, and she accepted my invitation with alacrity. They were even more attractive than their photographs had suggested, and she was right to be proud of them. I was young enough for them not to feel shy, and they chattered merrily about one thing and another. They were extraordinarily nice, healthy young children. It was very agreeable under the trees. When in an hour they crowded into a cab to go home, I strolled idly to my club. I was perhaps a little lonely, and it was with a touch of envy that I thought of the pleasant family life of which I had had a glimpse. They seemed devoted to one another. They had little private jokes of their own which, unintelligible to the outsider, amused them enormously. Perhaps Charles Strickland was dull judged by a standard that demanded above all things verbal scintillation, but his intelligence was adequate to his surroundings, and that is a passport, not only to reasonable success, but still more to happiness. Mrs. Strickland was a charming woman, and she loved him. I pictured their lives troubled by no untoward adventure, honest, decent, and by reason of those two upstanding, pleasant children, so obviously destined to carry on the normal traditions of their race and station, not without significance. They would grow old insensibly. They would see their son and daughter come to years of reason, marry in due course, the one a pretty girl, future mother of healthy children, the other a handsome, manly fellow, obviously a soldier, and at last, prosperous in their dignified retirement, beloved by their descendants after a happy, not unuseful life. In the fullness of their age, they would sink into the grave. That must be the story of innumerable couples, and the pattern of life it offers has a homely grace. It reminds you of a placid rivulet meandering smoothly through green pastures and shaded by pleasant trees, till at last it falls into the vasty sea. But the sea is so calm, so silent, so indifferent, that you are troubled suddenly by a vague uneasiness. Perhaps it is only by a kink in my nature, strong in me even in those days, that I felt in such an existence the share of the great majority, something amiss. I recognized its social values, I saw its ordered happiness, but a fever in my blood asked for a wilder course. There seemed to me something alarming in such easy delights. In my heart was a desire to live more dangerously. I was not unprepared for jagged rocks and treacherous shoals if I could only have change and the excitement of the unforeseen. Chapter 8. On reading over what I have written of the Stricklands, I am conscious that they must seem shadowy. I have been able to invest them with none of those characteristics which make the persons of a book exist with a real life of their own, and wondering if the fault is mine, I rack my brains to remember idiosyncrasies which might lend them vividness. I feel that by dwelling on some trick of speech or some queer habit, I should be able to give them a significance peculiar to themselves. As they stand, they are like the figures in an old tapestry. They do not separate themselves from the background, and at a distance seem to lose their pattern, so that you have little but a pleasing piece of color. My only excuse is that the impression they made on me was no other. There was just that shadowiness about them which you find in people whose lives are part of the social organism, so that they exist in it and by it only. They are like cells in the body, essential, but so long as they remain healthy, engulfed in the momentous whole. The Stricklands were an average family in the middle class, a pleasant, hospitable woman with a harmless craze for the small lions of literary society. A rather dull man, doing his duty in that state of life in which a merciful providence had placed him. Two nice-looking, healthy children. Nothing could be more ordinary. I do not know that there was anything about them to excite the attention of the curious. When I reflect on all that happened later, I ask myself if I was thick-witted, not to see that there was in Charles Strickland at least something out of the common. Perhaps. I think that I have gathered in the years that intervene between then and now a fair knowledge of mankind, but even if when I first met the Stricklands I had the experience which I have now, I do not believe that I should have judged them differently. But because I have learnt that man is incalculable, I should not at this time of day be so surprised by the news that reached me when in the early autumn I returned to London. I had not been back 24 hours before I ran across Rose Waterford in Jermyn Street. "You look very gay and sprightly," I said. "What's the matter with you?" She smiled, and her eyes shone with a malice I knew already. It meant that she had heard some scandal about one of her friends, and the instinct of the literary woman was all alert. "You did meet Charles Strickland, didn't you?" Not only her face, but her whole body gave a sense of alacrity. I nodded. I wondered if the poor devil had been hammered on the stock exchange or run over by an omnibus. "Isn't it dreadful?" "He's run away from his wife." Miss Waterford certainly felt that she could not do her subject justice on the curb of Jermyn Street, and so, like an artist, flung the bare fact at me and declared that she knew no details. I could not do her the injustice of supposing that so trifling a circumstance would have prevented her from giving them, but she was obstinate. "I tell you I know nothing," she said, in reply to my agitated questions, and then with an airy shrug of the shoulders. "I believe that a young person in a city tea shop has left her situation." She flashed a smile at me, and protesting an engagement with her dentist, jauntily walked on. I was more interested than distressed. In those days, my experience of life at first hand was small, and it excited me to come upon an incident among people I knew of the same sort as I had read in the books. I confess that time has now accustomed me to incidents of this character among my acquaintance, but I was a little shocked. Strickland was certainly 40, and I thought it disgusting that a man of his age should concern himself with affairs of the heart. With the superciliousness of extreme youth, I put 35 as the utmost limit at which a man might fall in love without making a fool of himself. And this news was slightly disconcerting to me personally, because I had written from the country to Mrs. Strickland announcing my return, and had added that unless I heard from her to the contrary, I would come on a certain day to drink a dish of tea with her. This was the very day, and I had received no word from Mrs. Strickland. Did she want to see me, or did she not? It was likely enough that in the agitation of the moment my note had escaped her memory. Perhaps I should be wiser not to go. On the other hand, she might wish to keep the affair quiet, and it might be highly indiscreet on my part to give any sign that this strange news had reached me. I was torn between the fear of hurting a nice woman's feelings and the fear of being in the way. I felt she must be suffering, and I did not want to see a pain which I could not help. But in my heart was a desire that I felt a little ashamed of to see how she was taking it. I did not know what to do. Finally, it occurred to me that I would call as though nothing had happened and send a message in by the maid asking Mrs. Strickland if it was convenient for her to see me. This would give her the opportunity to send me away. But I was overwhelmed with embarrassment when I said to the maid the phrase I had prepared, and while I waited for the answer in a dark passage, I had to call up all my strength of mind not to bolt. The maid came back. Her manner suggested to my excited fancy a complete knowledge of the domestic calamity. "Will you come this way, sir?" she said. I followed her into the drawing-room. The blinds were partly drawn to darken the room, and Mrs. Strickland was sitting with her back to the light. Her brother-in-law, Colonel MacAndrew, stood in front of the fireplace, warming his back at an unlit fire. To myself, my entrance seemed excessively awkward. I imagined that my arrival had taken them by surprise, and Mrs. Strickland had let me come in only because she had forgotten to put me off. I fancied that the Colonel resented the interruption. "I wasn't quite sure if you expected me," I said, trying to seem unconcerned. "Of course I did. Anne will bring the tea in a minute." Even in the darkened room, I could not help seeing that Mrs. Strickland's face was all swollen with tears. Her skin, never very good, was earthy. "You remember my brother-in-law, don't you? You met at dinner, just before the holidays." We shook hands. I felt so shy that I could think of nothing to say, but Mrs. Strickland came to my rescue. She asked me what I had been doing with myself during the summer, and with this help I managed to make some conversation till tea was brought in. The Colonel asked for a whiskey and soda. "You'd better have one too, Amy," he said. "No, I prefer tea." This was the first suggestion that anything untoward had happened. I took no notice and did my best to engage Mrs. Strickland in talk. The Colonel, still standing in front of the fireplace, uttered no word. I wondered how soon I could decently take my leave, and I asked myself why on earth Mrs. Strickland had allowed me to come. There were no flowers, and various knickknacks put away during the summer had not been replaced. There was something cheerless and stiff about the room which had always seemed so friendly. It gave you an odd feeling, as though someone were lying dead on the other side of the wall. I finished tea. "Will you have a cigarette?" asked Mrs. Strickland. She looked about for the box, but it was not to be seen. "I'm afraid there are none." Suddenly she burst into tears and hurried from the room. I was startled. I suppose now that the lack of cigarettes, brought as a rule by her husband, forced him back upon her recollection, and the new feeling that the small comforts she was used to were missing gave her a sudden pang. She realized that the old life was gone and done with. It was impossible to keep up our social pretenses any longer. "I dare say you'd like me to go," I said to the Colonel, getting up. "I suppose you've heard that blackguard has deserted her," he cried explosively. I hesitated. "You know how people gossip," I answered. I was vaguely told that something was wrong. "He's bolted. He's gone off to Paris with a woman. He's left Amy without a penny." "I'm awfully sorry," I said, not knowing what else to say. The Colonel gulped down his whiskey. He was a tall, lean man of 50, with a drooping moustache and grey hair. He had pale blue eyes and a weak mouth. I remembered from my previous meeting with him that he had a foolish face and was proud of the fact that for the 10 years before he left the army, he had played polo 3 days a week. "I don't suppose Mrs. Strickland wants to be bothered with me just now," I said. "Will you tell her how sorry I am? If there's anything I can do, I shall be delighted to do it." He took no notice of me. "I don't know what's to become of her. And then there are the children. Are they going to live on air? 17 years. "What about 17 years? They've been married," he snapped. "I never liked him." Of course, he was my brother-in-law, and I made the best of it. "Did you think him a gentleman? She ought never to have married him." "Is it absolutely final?" "There's only one thing for her to do, and that's to divorce him. That's what I was telling her when you came in." "Fire in with your petition, my dear Amy," I said. "You owe it to yourself, and you owe it to the children. He'd better not let me catch sight of him. I'd thrash him within an inch of his life." I could not help thinking that Colonel MacAndrew might have some difficulty in doing this, since Strickland had struck me as a hefty fellow, but I did not say anything. It is always distressing when outraged morality does not possess the strength of arm to administer direct chastisement on the sinner. I was making up my mind to another attempt at going when Mrs. Strickland came back. She had dried her eyes and powdered her nose. "I'm sorry I broke down," she said. "I'm glad you didn't go away." She sat down. I did not at all know what to say. I felt a certain shyness at referring to matters which were no concern of mine. I did not then know the besetting sin of woman, the passion to discuss her private affairs with anyone who is willing to listen. Mrs. Strickland seemed to make an effort over herself. "Are people talking about it?" she asked. I was taken aback by her assumption that I knew all about her domestic misfortune. "I've only just come back. The only person I've seen is Rose Waterford." Mrs. Strickland clasped her hands. "Tell me exactly what she said." And when I hesitated, she insisted. "I particularly want to know." "You know the way people talk. She's not very reliable, is she? She said your husband had left you. Is that all? I did not choose to repeat Rose Waterford's parting reference to a girl from a tea shop. I lied. She didn't say anything about his going with anyone. No, that's all I wanted to know. I was a little puzzled, but at all events I understood that I might now take my leave. When I shook hands with Mrs. Strickland, I told her that if I could be of any use to her, I should be very glad. She smiled wanly. Thank you so much. I don't know that anybody can do anything for me. Too shy to express my sympathy, I turned to say goodbye to the Colonel. He did not take my hand. I'm just coming. If you're walking up Victoria Street, I'll come along with you. All right, I said. Come on. Chapter 9. This is a terrible thing, he said, the moment we got out into the street. I realized that he had come away with me in order to discuss once more what he had been already discussing for hours with his sister-in-law. We don't know who the woman is, you know, he said. All we know is that the blackguard's gone to Paris. I thought they got on so well. So they did. Why, just before you came in, Amy said they'd never had a quarrel in the whole of their married life. You know Amy. There never was a better woman in the world. Since these confidences were thrust on me, I saw no harm in asking a few questions. But do you mean to say she suspected nothing? Nothing. He spent August with her and the children in Norfolk. He was just the same as he'd always been. We went down for 2 or 3 days, my wife and I played golf with him. He came back to town in September to let his partner go away, and Amy stayed on in the country. They'd taken a house for 6 weeks, and at the end of her tenancy, she wrote to tell him on which day she was arriving in London. He answered from Paris. He said he'd made up his mind not to live with her any more. What explanation did he give? My dear fellow, he gave no explanation. I've seen the letter. It wasn't more than 10 lines. But that's extraordinary. We happened then to cross the street, and the traffic prevented us from speaking. What Colonel MacAndrew had told me seemed very improbable, and I suspected that Mrs. Strickland, for reasons of her own, had concealed from him some part of the facts. It was clear that a man after 17 years of wedlock did not leave his wife without certain occurrences, which must have led her to suspect that all was not well with their married life. The Colonel caught me up. Of course, there was no explanation he could give, except that he'd gone off with a woman. I suppose he thought she could find that out for herself. That's the sort of chap he was. What is Mrs. Strickland going to do? Well, the first thing is to get our proofs. I'm going over to Paris myself. And what about his business? That's where he's been so artful. He's been drawing in his horns for the last year. Did he tell his partner he was leaving? Not a word. Colonel MacAndrew had a very sketchy knowledge of business matters, and I had none at all, so I did not quite understand under what conditions Strickland had left his affairs. I gathered that the deserted partner was very angry and threatened proceedings. It appeared that when everything was settled, he would be £400 or £500 out of pocket. It's lucky the furniture in the flat is in Amy's name. She'll have that at all events. Did you mean it when you said she wouldn't have a bob? Of course I did. She's got £200 or £300 in the furniture. But how is she going to live? God knows. The affair seemed to grow more complicated, and the Colonel, with his expletives and his indignation, confused rather than informed me. I was glad that, catching sight of the clock at the Army and Navy stores, he remembered an engagement to play cards at his club, and so left me to cut across St. James Park. Chapter 10. A day or two later, Mrs. Strickland sent me round a note asking if I could go and see her that evening after dinner. I found her alone. Her black dress, simple to austerity, suggested her bereaved condition. And I was innocently astonished that, notwithstanding a real emotion, she was able to dress the part she had to play according to her notions of seemliness. You said that if I wanted you to do anything, you wouldn't mind doing it, she remarked. It was quite true. Will you go over to Paris and see Charlie? I was taken aback. I reflected that I'd only seen him once. I did not know what she wanted me to do. Fred is set on going. Fred was Colonel MacAndrew. But I'm sure he's not the man to go. He'll only make things worse. I don't know who else to ask. Her voice trembled a little, and I felt a brute even to hesitate. "But I've not spoken 10 words to your husband. He doesn't know me. He'll probably just tell me to go to the devil." "That wouldn't hurt you," said Mrs. Strickland, smiling. "What is it exactly you want me to do?" She did not answer directly. "I think it's rather an advantage that he doesn't know you. You see, he never really liked Fred. He thought him a fool. He didn't understand soldiers. Fred would fly into a passion, and there'd be a quarrel, and things would be worse instead of better. If you said you came on my behalf, he couldn't refuse to listen to you." "I haven't known you very long," I answered. "I don't see how anyone can be expected to tackle a case like this unless he knows all the details. I don't want to pry into what doesn't concern me." "Why don't you go and see him yourself?" "You forget he isn't alone." I held my tongue. I saw myself calling on Charles Strickland and sending in my card. I saw him come into the room, holding it between finger and thumb. "To what do I owe this honor?" "I've come to see you about your wife." "Really? When you are a little older, you will doubtless learn the advantage of minding your own business. If you will be so good as to turn your head slightly to the left, you will see the door. I wish you good afternoon." I foresaw that it would be difficult to make my exit with dignity, and I wished to goodness that I had not returned to London till Mrs. Strickland had composed her difficulties. I stole a glance at her. She was immersed in thought. Presently she looked up at me, sighed deeply, and smiled. "It was all so unexpected," she said. "We'd been married 17 years. I never dreamed that Charlie was the sort of man to get infatuated with anyone. We always got on very well together. Of course, I had a great many interests that he didn't share." "Have you found out who—" I did not quite know how to express myself. "Who the person who it is he's gone away with?" "No. No one seems to have an idea. It's so strange. Generally, when a man falls in love with someone, people see them about together, lunching or something, and her friends always come and tell the wife. I had no warning. Nothing. His letter came like a thunderbolt. I thought he was perfectly happy." She began to cry, poor thing, and I felt very sorry for her. But in a little while she grew calmer. "It's no good making a fool of myself," she said, drying her eyes. "The only thing is to decide what is the best thing to do." She went on, talking somewhat at random, now of the recent past, then of their first meeting and their marriage. But presently I began to form a fairly coherent picture of their lives, and it seemed to me that my surmises had not been incorrect. Mrs. Strickland was the daughter of an Indian civilian, who on his retirement had settled in the depths of the country, but it was his habit every August to take his family to Eastbourne for change of air, and it was here when she was 20 that she met Charles Strickland. He was 23. They played together, walked on the front together, listened together to the nigger minstrels, and she had made up her mind to accept him a week before he proposed to her. They lived in London, first in Hampstead, and then, as he grew more prosperous, in town. 2 children were born to them. He always seemed very fond of them. Even if he was tired of me, I wonder that he had the heart to leave them. It's all so incredible. Even now I can hardly believe it's true. At last she showed me the letter he had written. I was curious to see it, but had not ventured to ask for it. "My dear Amy, I think you will find everything all right in the flat. I have given Anne your instructions, and dinner will be ready for you and the children when you come. I shall not be there to meet you. I have made up my mind to live apart from you, and I am going to Paris in the morning. I shall post this letter on my arrival. I shall not come back. My decision is irrevocable. Yours always, Charles Strickland." Not a word of explanation or regret. Don't you think it's inhuman? "It's a very strange letter under the circumstances," I replied. "There's only one explanation, and that is that he's not himself. I don't know who this woman is who's got hold of him, but she's made him into another man. It's evidently been going on a long time." "What makes you think that?" "Fred found that out. My husband said he went to the club 3 or 4 nights a week to play bridge. Fred knows one of the members and said something about Charles being a great bridge player. The man was surprised. He said he'd never even seen Charles in the card room. It's quite clear now that when I thought Charles was at his club, he was with her." I was silent for a moment. Then I thought of the children. It must have been difficult to explain to Robert, I said. Oh, I never said a word to either of them. You see, we only came up to town the day before they had to go back to school. I had the presence of mind to say that their father had been called away on business. It could not have been very easy to be bright and careless with that sudden secret in her heart, nor to give her attention to all the things that needed doing to get her children comfortably packed off. Mrs. Strickland's voice broke again. And what is to happen to them, poor darlings? How are we going to live? She struggled for self-control, and I saw her hands clench and unclench spasmodically. It was dreadfully painful. Of course I'll go over to Paris if you think I can do any good, but you must tell me exactly what you want me to do. I want him to come back. I understood from Colonel MacAndrew that you'd made up your mind to divorce him. I'll never divorce him, she answered with a sudden violence. Tell him that from me. He'll never be able to marry that woman. I'm as obstinate as he is, and I'll never divorce him. I have to think of my children. I think she added this to explain her attitude to me, but I thought it was due to a very natural jealousy rather than to maternal solicitude. Are you in love with him still? I don't know. I want him to come back. If he'll do that, we'll let bygones be bygones. After all, we've been married for 17 years. I'm a broad-minded woman. I wouldn't have minded what he did as long as I knew nothing about it. He must know that his infatuation won't last. If he'll come back now, everything can be smoothed over, and no one will know anything about it. It chilled me a little that Mrs. Strickland should be concerned with gossip, for I did not know then how great a part is played in women's life by the opinion of others. It throws a shadow of insincerity over their most deeply felt emotions. It was known where Strickland was staying. His partner, in a violent letter sent to his bank, had taunted him with hiding his whereabouts. And Strickland, in a cynical and humorous reply, had told his partner exactly where to find him. He was apparently living in an hotel. I've never heard of it, said Mrs. Strickland, but Fred knows it well. He says it's very expensive. She flushed darkly. I imagined that she saw her husband installed in a luxurious suite of rooms, dining at one smart restaurant after another, and she pictured his days spent at race meetings and his evenings at the play. It can't go on at his age, she said. After all, he's 40. I could understand it in a young man, but I think it's horrible in a man of his years, with children who are nearly grown up. His health will never stand it. Anger struggled in her breast with misery. Tell him that our home cries out for him. Everything is just the same, and yet everything is different. I can't live without him. I'd sooner kill myself. Talk to him about the past and all we've gone through together. What am I to say to the children when they ask for him? His room is exactly as it was when he left it. It's waiting for him. We're all waiting for him. Now she told me exactly what I should say. She gave me elaborate answers to every possible observation of his. You will do everything you can for me? She said pitifully. Tell him what a state I'm in. I saw that she wished me to appeal to his sympathies by every means in my power. She was weeping freely. I was extraordinarily touched. I felt indignant at Strickland's cold cruelty, and I promised to do all I could to bring him back. I agreed to go over on the next day but one, and to stay in Paris till I had achieved something. Then, as it was growing late and we were both exhausted by so much emotion, I left her. Chapter 11. During the journey, I thought over my errand with misgiving. Now that I was free from the spectacle of Mrs. Strickland's distress, I could consider the matter more calmly. I was puzzled by the contradictions that I saw in her behavior. She was very unhappy, but to excite my sympathy, she was able to make a show of her unhappiness. It was evident that she had been prepared to weep, for she had provided herself with a sufficiency of handkerchiefs. I admired her forethought, but in retrospect it made her tears perhaps less moving. I could not decide whether she desired the return of her husband because she loved him or because she dreaded the tongue of scandal, and I was perturbed by the suspicion that the anguish of love contemned was alloyed in her broken heart with the pangs, sordid to my young mind, of wounded vanity. I had not yet learnt how contradictory is human nature. I did not know how much pose there is in the sincere, how much baseness in the noble, nor how much goodness in the reprobate. But there was something of an adventure in my trip, and my spirits rose as I approached Paris. I saw myself, too, from the dramatic standpoint, and I was pleased with my role of the trusted friend bringing back the errant husband to his forgiving wife. I made up my mind to see Strickland the following evening, for I felt instinctively that the hour must be chosen with delicacy. An appeal to the emotions is little likely to be effectual before luncheon. My own thoughts were then constantly occupied with love, but I never could imagine connubial bliss till after tea. I inquired at my hotel for that in which Charles Strickland was living. It was called the Hôtel des Belges, but the concierge, somewhat to my surprise, had never heard of it. I had understood from Mrs. Strickland that it was a large and sumptuous place at the back of the Rue de Rivoli. We looked it out in the directory. The only hotel of that name was in the Rue des Moines. The quarter was not fashionable. It was not even respectable. I shook my head. "I'm sure that's not it," I said. The concierge shrugged his shoulders. There was no other hotel of that name in Paris. It occurred to me that Strickland had concealed his address after all. In giving his partner the one, I knew he was perhaps playing a trick on him. I do not know why I had an inkling that it would appeal to Strickland's sense of humor to bring a furious stockbroker over to Paris on a fool's errand to an ill-famed house in a mean street. Still, I thought I had better go and see. Next day, about 6 o'clock, I took a cab to the Rue des Moines, but dismissed it at the corner since I preferred to walk to the hotel and look at it before I went in. It was a street of small shops subservient to the needs of poor people, and about the middle of it, on the left as I walked down, was the Hôtel des Belges. My own hotel was modest enough, but it was magnificent in comparison with this. It was a tall, shabby building that cannot have been painted for years, and it had so bedraggled an air that the houses on each side of it looked neat and clean. The dirty windows were all shut. It was not here that Charles Strickland lived in guilty splendor with the unknown charmer for whose sake he had abandoned honor and duty. I was vexed, for I felt that I had been made a fool of, and I nearly turned away without making an inquiry. I went in only to be able to tell Mrs. Strickland that I had done my best. The door was at the side of a shop. It stood open, and just within was a sign, Bureau au Premier. I walked up narrow stairs, and on the landing found a sort of box, glassed in, within which were a desk and a couple of chairs. There was a bench outside on which it might be presumed the night porter passed uneasy nights. There was no one about, but under an electric bell was written Garçon. I rang, and presently a waiter appeared. He was a young man with furtive eyes and a sullen look. He was in shirt sleeves and carpet slippers. I do not know why I made my inquiry as casual as possible. "Does Mr. Strickland live here by any chance?" I asked. "Number 32, on the 6th floor. I was so surprised that for a moment I did not answer. "Is he in?" The waiter looked at a board in the bureau. "He hasn't left his key." "Go up and you'll see." I thought it as well to put one more question. "Madame est là?" "Monsieur est seul?" The waiter looked at me suspiciously as I made my way upstairs. They were dark and airless. There was a foul and musty smell. 3 flights up, a woman in a dressing gown with tousled hair opened a door and looked at me silently as I passed. At length I reached the 6th floor and knocked at the door numbered 32. There was a sound within, and the door was partly opened. Charles Strickland stood before me. He uttered not a word. He evidently did not know me. I told him my name. I tried my best to assume an airy manner. "You don't remember me?" "I had the pleasure of dining with you last July." "Come in," he said cheerily. "I'm delighted to see you. Take a pew." I entered. It was a very small room, overcrowded with furniture of the style which the French know as Louis Philippe. There was a large wooden bedstead on which was a billowing red eiderdown, and there was a large wardrobe, a round table, a very small washstand, and 2 stuffed chairs covered with red rep. Everything was dirty and shabby. There was no sign of the abandoned luxury that Colonel MacAndrew had so confidently described. Strickland threw on the floor the clothes that burdened one of the chairs, and I sat down on it. "What can I do for you?" he asked. In that small room he seemed even bigger than I remembered him. He wore an old Norfolk jacket, and he had not shaved for several days. When last I saw him, he was spruce enough, but he looked ill at ease. Now, untidy and ill-kempt, he looked perfectly at home. I did not know how he would take the remark I had prepared. "I've come to see you on behalf of your wife. I was just going out to have a drink before dinner." "You'd better come too. Do you like absinthe? I can drink it." "Come on then." He put on a bowler hat, much in need of brushing. "We might dine together. You owe me a dinner, you know." "Certainly. Are you alone?" I flattered myself that I had got in that important question very naturally. "Oh yes, in point of fact, I've not spoken to a soul for 3 days. My French isn't exactly brilliant." I wondered as I preceded him downstairs what had happened to the little lady in the tea shop. Had they quarrelled already, or was his infatuation past? It seemed hardly likely if, as appeared, he had been taking steps for a year to make his desperate plunge. We walked to the Avenue de Clichy and sat down at one of the tables on the pavement of a large café. Chapter 12. The Avenue de Clichy was crowded at that hour, and a lively fancy might see in the passers-by the personages of many a sordid romance. There were clerks and shopgirls, old fellows who might have stepped out of the pages of Honoré de Balzac, members, male and female, of the professions which make their profit of the frailties of mankind. There is in the streets of the poorer quarters of Paris a thronging vitality which excites the blood and prepares the soul for the unexpected. "Do you know Paris well?" I asked. "No, we came on our honeymoon. I haven't been since." "How on earth did you find out your hotel?" "It was recommended to me. I wanted something cheap." The absinthe came, and with due solemnity we dropped water over the melting sugar. "I thought I'd better tell you at once why I had come to see you," I said, not without embarrassment. His eyes twinkled. "I thought somebody would come along sooner or later. I've had a lot of letters from Amy." "Then you know pretty well what I've got to say." "I've not read them." I lit a cigarette to give myself a moment's time. I did not quite know now how to set about my mission. The eloquent phrases I had arranged, pathetic or indignant, seemed out of place on the Avenue de Clichy. Suddenly he gave a chuckle. "Beastly job for you this, isn't it?" "Oh, I don't know," I answered. "Well, look here, you get it over, and then we'll have a jolly evening." I hesitated. "Has it occurred to you that your wife is frightfully unhappy?" "She'll get over it." I cannot describe the extraordinary callousness with which he made this reply. It disconcerted me, but I did my best not to show it. I adopted the tone used by my Uncle Henry, a clergyman, when he was asking one of his relatives for a subscription to the Additional Curates Society. "You don't mind my talking to you frankly?" He shook his head, smiling. "Has she deserved that you should treat her like this?" "No." "Have you any complaint to make against her?" "None." "Then isn't it monstrous to leave her in this fashion after 17 years of married life without a fault to find with her?" "Monstrous." I glanced at him with surprise. His cordial agreement with all I said cut the ground from under my feet. It made my position complicated, not to say ludicrous. I was prepared to be persuasive, touching, and hortatory, admonitory and expostulating, if need be vituperative, even indignant and sarcastic. But what the devil does a mentor do when the sinner makes no bones about confessing his sin? I had no experience, since my own practice has always been to deny everything. "What then?" asked Strickland. I tried to curl my lip. "Well, if you acknowledge that, there doesn't seem much more to be said." "I don't think there is." I felt that I was not carrying out my embassy with any great skill. I was distinctly nettled. "Hang it all, one can't leave a woman without a bob." "Why not? How is she going to live?" "I've supported her for 17 years. Why shouldn't she support herself for a change?" "She can't." "Let her try." Of course, there were many things I might have answered to this. I might have spoken of the economic position of woman, of the contract, tacit and overt, which a man accepts by his marriage, and of much else. But I felt that there was only one point which really signified. "Don't you care for her any more?" "Not a bit," he replied. The matter was immensely serious for all the parties concerned, But there was in the manner of his answer such a cheerful effrontery that I had to bite my lips in order not to laugh. I reminded myself that his behavior was abominable. I worked myself up into a state of moral indignation. Damn it all, there are your children to think of. They've never done you any harm. They didn't ask to be brought into the world. If you chuck everything like this, they'll be thrown on the streets. They've had a good many years of comfort. It's much more than the majority of children have. Besides, somebody will look after them. When it comes to the point, the McAndrews will pay for their schooling. But aren't you fond of them? They're such awfully nice kids. Do you mean to say you don't want to have anything more to do with them? I liked them all right when they were kids, but now they're growing up. I haven't got any particular feeling for them. It's just inhuman, I dare say. You don't seem in the least ashamed. I'm not. I tried another tack. Everyone will think you a perfect swine. Let them. Won't it mean anything to you to know that people loathe and despise you? No. His brief answer was so scornful that it made my question, natural though it was, seem absurd. I reflected for a minute or two. I wonder if one can live quite comfortably when one's conscious of the disapproval of one's fellows. Are you sure it won't begin to worry you? Everyone has some sort of a conscience, and sooner or later it will find you out. Supposing your wife died, wouldn't you be tortured by remorse? He did not answer, and I waited for some time for him to speak. At last I had to break the silence myself. What have you to say to that? Only that you're a damned fool. At all events, you can be forced to support your wife and children, I retorted, somewhat piqued. I suppose the law has some protection to offer them. Can the law get blood out of a stone? I haven't any money. I've got about £100. I began to be more puzzled than before. It was true that his hotel pointed to the most straitened circumstances. What are you going to do when you've spent that? Earn some. He was perfectly cool, and his eyes kept that mocking smile which made all I said seem rather foolish. I paused for a little while to consider what I had better say next. But it was he who spoke first. Why doesn't Amy marry again? She's comparatively young, and she's not unattractive. I can recommend her as an excellent wife. If she wants to divorce me, I don't mind giving her the necessary grounds. Now it was my turn to smile. He was very cunning, but it was evidently this that he was aiming at. He had some reason to conceal the fact that he had run away with a woman, and he was using every precaution to hide her whereabouts. I answered with decision. Your wife says that nothing you can do will ever induce her to divorce you. She's quite made up her mind. You can put any possibility of that definitely out of your head. He looked at me with an astonishment that was certainly not feigned. The smile abandoned his lips, and he spoke quite seriously. But, my dear fellow, I don't care. It doesn't matter a twopenny damn to me one way or the other. I laughed. Oh, come now, you mustn't think us such fools as all that. We happen to know that you came away with a woman. He gave a little start, and then suddenly burst into a shout of laughter. He laughed so uproariously that people sitting near us looked round, and some of them began to laugh too. I don't see anything very amusing in that. Poor Amy, he grinned. Then his face grew bitterly scornful. What poor minds women have got. Love. It's always love. They think a man leaves only because he wants others. Do you think I should be such a fool as to do what I've done for a woman? Do you mean to say you didn't leave your wife for another woman? Of course not. On your word of honor? I don't know why I asked for that. It was very ingenuous of me. On my word of honor. Then what in God's name have you left her for? I want to paint. I looked at him for quite a long time. I did not understand. I thought he was mad. It must be remembered that I was very young, and I looked upon him as a middle-aged man. I forgot everything but my own amazement. But you're 40. That's what made me think it was high time to begin. Have you ever painted? I rather wanted to be a painter when I was a boy, but my father made me go into business because he said there was no money in art. I began to paint a bit a year ago. For the last year, I've been going to some classes at night. Was that where you went when Mrs. Strickland thought you were playing bridge at your club? That's it. Why didn't you tell her? I preferred to keep it to myself. Can you paint? Not yet. But I shall. That's why I've come over here. I couldn't get what I wanted in London. Perhaps I can here. Do you think it's likely that a man will do any good when he starts at your age? Most men begin painting at 18. I can learn quicker than I could when I was 18. What makes you think you have any talent? He did not answer for a minute. His gaze rested on the passing throng, but I do not think he saw it. His answer was no answer. I've got to paint. Aren't you taking an awful chance? He looked at me. His eyes had something strange in them, so that I felt rather uncomfortable. How old are you? 23. It seemed to me that the question was beside the point. It was natural that I should take chances, but he was a man whose youth was past, a stockbroker with a position of respectability, a wife and 2 children. A course that would have been natural for me was absurd for him. I wished to be quite fair. Of course a miracle may happen, and you may be a great painter, but you must confess the chances are 1,000,000 to 1 against it. It'll be an awful sell if at the end you have to acknowledge you've made a hash of it. I've got to paint, he repeated. Supposing you're never anything more than third rate, do you think it will have been worthwhile to give up everything? After all, in any other walk in life, it doesn't matter if you're not very good. You can get along quite comfortably if you're just adequate. But it's different with an artist. You blasted fool, he said. I don't see why, unless it's folly to say the obvious. I tell you I've got to paint. I can't help myself. When a man falls into the water, it doesn't matter how he swims, well or badly. He's got to get out or else he'll drown. There was real passion in his voice, and in spite of myself, I was impressed. I seemed to feel in him some vehement power that was struggling within him. It gave me the sensation of something very strong, overmastering, that held him, as it were, against his will. I could not understand. He seemed really to be possessed of a devil, and I felt that it might suddenly turn and rend him. Yet he looked ordinary enough. My eyes, resting on him curiously, caused him no embarrassment. I wondered what a stranger would have taken him to be, sitting there in his old Norfolk jacket and his unbrushed bowler. His trousers were baggy, his hands were not clean, and his face, with the red stubble of the unshaved chin, the little eyes and the large aggressive nose, was uncouth and coarse. His mouth was large, his lips were heavy and sensual. No, I could not have placed him. You won't go back to your wife, I said at last. Never. She's willing to forget everything that's happened and start afresh. She'll never make you a single reproach. She can go to hell. You don't care if people think you an utter blackguard? You don't care if she and your children have to beg their bread? Not a damn. I was silent for a moment in order to give greater force to my next remark. I spoke as deliberately as I could. You are a most unmitigated cad. Now that you've got that off your chest, let's go and have dinner. Chapter 13. I dare say it would have been more seemly to decline this proposal. I think perhaps I should have made a show of the indignation I really felt, and I am sure that Colonel MacAndrew at least would have thought well of me if I had been able to report my stout refusal to sit at the same table with a man of such character. But the fear of not being able to carry it through effectively has always made me shy of assuming the moral attitude. And in this case, the certainty that my sentiments would be lost on Strickland made it peculiarly embarrassing to utter them. Only the poet or the saint can water an asphalt pavement in the confident anticipation that lilies will reward his labor. I paid for what we had drunk, and we made our way to a cheap restaurant, crowded and gay, where we dined with pleasure. I had the appetite of youth, and he of a hardened conscience. Then we went to a tavern to have coffee and liqueurs. I had said all I had to say on the subject that had brought me to Paris, and though I felt it in a manner treacherous to Mrs. Strickland not to pursue it, I could not struggle against his indifference. It requires the feminine temperament to repeat the same thing 3 times with unabated zest. I solaced myself by thinking that it would be useful for me to find out what I could about Strickland's state of mind. It also interested me much more, but this was not an easy thing to do, for Strickland was not a fluent talker. He seemed to express himself with difficulty, as though words were not the medium with which his mind worked. And you had to guess the intentions of his soul, by hackneyed phrases, slang, and vague, unfinished gestures. But though he said nothing of any consequence, there was something in his personality which prevented him from being dull. Perhaps it was sincerity. He did not seem to care much about the Paris he was now seeing for the first time. I did not count the visit with his wife. And he accepted sights which must have been strange to him without any sense of astonishment. I have been to Paris 100 times, and it never fails to give me a thrill of excitement. I can never walk its streets without feeling myself on the verge of adventure. Strickland remained placid. Looking back, I think now that he was blind to everything but to some disturbing vision in his soul. One rather absurd incident took place. There were a number of harlots in the tavern. Some were sitting with men, others by themselves, and presently I noticed that one of these was looking at us. When she caught Strickland's eye, she smiled. I do not think he saw her. In a little while she went out, but in a minute returned and, passing our table, very politely asked us to buy her something to drink. She sat down and I began to chat with her, but it was plain that her interest was in Strickland. I explained that he knew no more than 2 words of French. She tried to talk to him, partly by signs, partly in pidgin French, which for some reason she thought would be more comprehensible to him, and she had 6 phrases of English. She made me translate what she could only express in her own tongue, and eagerly asked for the meaning of his replies. He was quite good-tempered, a little amused, but his indifference was obvious. "I think you've made a conquest," I laughed. "I'm not flattered." In his place, I should have been more embarrassed and less calm. She had laughing eyes and a most charming mouth. She was young. I wondered what she found so attractive in Strickland. She made no secret of her desires, and I was bidden to translate. "She wants you to go home with her." "I'm not taking any," he replied. I put his answer as pleasantly as I could. It seemed to me a little ungracious to decline an invitation of that sort, and I ascribed his refusal to lack of money. "But I like him," she said. "Tell him it's for love." When I translated this, Strickland shrugged his shoulders impatiently. "Tell her to go to hell," he said. His manner made his answer quite plain, and the girl threw back her head with a sudden gesture. Perhaps she reddened under her paint. She rose to her feet. "Monsieur n'est pas poli?" she said. She walked out of the inn. I was slightly vexed. "There wasn't any need to insult her that I can see," I said. "After all, it was rather a compliment she was paying you." "That sort of thing makes me sick," he said roughly. I looked at him curiously. There was a real distaste in his face, and yet it was the face of a coarse and sensual man. I suppose the girl had been attracted by a certain brutality in it. I could have got all the women I wanted in London. I didn't come here for that.